And all right, let me get this thing started. So where we left off, we were talking about the Maya. We rewatched that little Maya 101 video. Pretty good. If you weren't here, it's worth checking out. It does give a good general sense of who the Maya were and some of the things they accomplished. Now, I like that we watched that yesterday because today to kind of open up, well, I don't want it to look like that. Today, when we open up, we can kind of review some of the stuff that we, well, I hate it when it does that. Display settings. Oh, come on now. Hold on. You know technology. Not always our friend. There we go. Okay. Anyway, so as we discuss this today, we'll review some of the stuff from the video. Again, we're going to open up today. I got a bunch of questions. Do your best to answer. I hate to on the spot and calling you, but if I got to, I will. So raise your hand, volunteer some information. Trust me, it's not that hard. First question. This is going to tell us a little bit about geography, but also it's going to lead to the political structure of the ancient Maya. Again, they were around for a very long time. Can anybody tell me where they were located? Southern part of Mexico. And it's not just Mexico, it's part of Guatemala, I think a little bit of Honduras. The key thing here is, for near geography, right, the Yucatan Peninsula. The Yucatan Peninsula. I think I mentioned yesterday, I went to Cancun a few years ago. That was on the very tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. We were actually pretty close to Chichen Itza. The mine sites in Cancun were all pretty much destroyed by the Spanish, but you can still see some remnants of one. See all these little dots here. Okay, let's talk about that. For most of their history, were the Maya like one big united civilization? I got a nod, or I got a no. They were not. So who can tell me what they were like? There's some vocab here that's really important to remember. But I'll give you a hint. The Maya, they were very similar to the ancient Greeks, as far as the fact that for most of their history, they're not really united. We lump them together because culturally they have those similarities. That's the same broad culture, same broad. Most of them are not united. In fact, they a bit. What do we call those little dots? Almost like tiny little self-governing countries. City-states. Make sure you have that down, probably under politics. They are city-states. Now these city-states, even though they're all Maya, they kind of competed with each other for resources, for dominance. A lot of times they would fight each other. And one of the big things that they would do is they would try to take over, not completely govern over a foreign city-state, sometimes they would, but one of the big things that they were trying to do was get stuff from those people. Like they wanted to demonstrate their dominance to where the next city-state would end up paying them off. They would give them crops, they would give them luxury goods, maybe even they'd give them people. In fact, a lot of times, in modern warfare, they weren't necessarily trying to kill each other, they were trying to take prisoners of war. We'll talk about why here in a second. But what do you call that? What do you call that sort of political structure? Where a group goes out and they either fight or they threaten some of their neighbors, where they essentially got to pay them off. The Chinese did this a lot during the Tang and Song dynasties. Tributary system. That's another big thing that I write. I see the exact same who do it on even a larger scale. So, real basics of politics. And one more thing. Their ruler. Can anybody tell me some characteristics of the ruler? What would the ruler kind of claim? And again, we're going to see that time and time again. And I know it gets repetitive. All the time I'm like, hey, guess what these guys do? But that's what I'm saying. You got to be able to identify these themes. If you can identify the similarities amongst civilizations during a time period, you're going to be able to draw conclusions. You're going to be able to answer test questions. Again, we're more big picture themes than little picture, nitpicks. Yeah, you need to know your vocab. Yeah, you need to be able to apply it in the correct ways, especially in your writing. But the big picture, if you got that, you're usually okay. One of the things that very similar to the ancient Egyptians, one of the things that they did to honor some of their past rulers and just kind of project power in their civilizations is they built pyramids. Up here, you've got essentially a religious temple, but it was also used for something else, something the Maya were huge into. And for their time, they were more of an expert in this subject than anyone else in the world. Anyone else in the world for hundreds, if not thousands of years. What were they into? They were if you think about it, I mean, the Maya, they ain't got no TV. They don't have those sort of distractions, but what they can do is they can observe the world around them. They can observe the cosmos. And because of that, they were able to create some very intricate calendar systems. I mean, they knew about the stars unlike anybody else in the world at the time. They had several imagines. They figured out by observation, you know what? 365 days in a year. That's crazy, just sitting there and kind of figuring out based on our position to everything else around us. But you know what? There's 365 days in a year. That's pretty astonishing. And again, that kind of speaks to their technological proficiency. You got a pyramid like this. Looks like it's made of stone, maybe limestone, something like that. Who do you think built this? Okay, let's go. You go first. Prisoners of war, part yes. I mean, slavery did exist in the Mayan world. But who else may have constructed at least a lot of it? Because again, you've only got X amount of laborers, and this is a huge process. Think about it. The people. What do we call that when you have to go and work for your government? Maybe against your will, like jury duty, or maybe the Egyptians building the pyramids. What's that called? Conscription. Conscripted labor. Again, I'm dropping all these vocab terms. Vocabulary, very important for SAQs. So just kind of think of these things. Very good. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about pyramids on here. And there were some burial tombs in these pyramids as well. But, unlike the Egyptian pyramids, these did serve multiple functions. In Mesoamerica, prior to the Maya, you don't really have written language. Okay, everything's being passed down orally. These are our Mayan glyphs. Okay, very similar to Egyptian hieroglyphs, which again, academically, they were very advanced, intellectually very advanced. Much like we talked about people like the Mississippians and the Chaco, adapt to their environment. Are fresh water. Their civilizations. With that, it makes it kind of hard to crops. So the Maya came up with a technique known as slash and burn agriculture. I'm not even referring to that. Slash and burn agriculture, where essentially they would cut down a lot of the foliage, a lot of the trees, a lot of the plants, and they would burn it. And as that ash seeped into the soil, it actually acted as kind of a fertilizer. Now, granted, Mayan agriculture, it wasn't as widespread as some Afro-Eurasian places because they don't have a lot of the advantages that we talked about. No metal tools, weapons, no big pack animals. Just imagine how hard that would have been to build without something. It's pretty astonishing. But the Maya certainly, they like everybody else, adapted. Has anybody ever seen something like that before? All right. Now, I had to write down the name because I can remember it on my own. This is the Makawato. I probably just made up that pronunciation, but Makawato. And essentially what this is, because again, the Maya don't have metal tools and weapons, but they've got hardwood. So this is like, you know, a club, but almost flat on the sides. It's like a paddle. You'll actually see it here in a second in the video. Does anybody know what these things sticking out are? They're not metal. This is pretty cool. Again, it's all about adapting to their environment. Yes, but it's a certain type of rock. It's volcanic glass. It's obsidian. And this stuff is sharper than a razor. The thing is, though, these pieces of obsidian that they put in here, they're only about that, maybe a little bit more, about that long coming out of the wood. So let me ask you, do you think they're really trying to kill people that they're fighting against? No, this is about cutting them up and beating the crap out of them. You also see it a little bit. The goal, you wanted to up to war. Use as slave labor, but they could also be used as something somebody said earlier, I think it was Estrada, human sacrifice. The Maya participated in human sacrifice. The Aztec really participated in human sacrifice. And we know this based on the evidence left behind, but you think about a lot of the accounts, especially with the Aztec, I mean, that's all coming from the Spanish. And they were trying to make them look bad. That way, you know, some of the stuff they did to them didn't sound so bad. But human sacrifice was a part of the belief system. They felt like the gods, this pantheon of gods, created us, and we sometimes have to be willing to spill blood to kind of satiate the gods. One last thing about the calendars. What year were you guys born? 2005. So you may remember this. Do you remember in 2012 when the world was going to end? Okay. That was because the Mayan long count calendar was coming to an end. And as we got closer to that date, people started to look back at the Mayans like, man, they knew a lot of stuff. They had some ancient wisdom. They observed the stars like no other. They had the most accurate calendars in the world. Their long count calendar was supposed to start at the beginning of time and was supposed to allegedly end when it was all going to end. And that was on, I forget, it's like December something, 2012. So as we got closer to it, it's like, oh, the apocalypse is coming. And you know, most people didn't really believe it. But that kind of shows you the respect that people have for the Maya thing. Western, very Americanized. We look at like timelines. It's all, you know, it's chronological. It goes in order. You know, it's like a flat line. Other cultures view it as a big cycle. You know, literally history repeating itself. The same sort of events, the same sort of problems are going to repeat over and over. So a lot of, you know, archaeologists and you know, people that study civilizations of the past, they kind of now interpret it as, you know what? Yeah, the long count calendar did end, but that was really the long count of one huge cycle. And in 2012, we entered. But again, globally, people freaking out because the Maya, they thought, said that the world was ending. Again, it tells you a little bit about how advanced they were. Anybody ever seen something like this? All right. It has different names, and it probably originated with the Olmec. Remember, the Olmec are kind of the foundational civilization of Mesoamerica. One of the places I went when I went to Cancun, you can kind of see the remains of a little bit of a ball court like this, but a lot of the pretty much all of them, all the Mayan city-states, they had these huge ceremonial ballrooms. And you'd have these two sides fighting each other, or not fighting each other, playing against each other. And think of this as kind of a mix between soccer and basketball. You would have stone hoops, or one stone hoop, along the side of this giant, you know, stone wall. And teams would have to get, you know, this ball. It was probably just a little bit smaller than the hoop. It was incredibly difficult. They'd have to get this ball through the hoop. From my understanding, using only their head, their elbows, their shoulders, their knees, their hips. No hands or feet. How long do you think a game like that would go on? That'd be so difficult. But this ball game had spiritual, religious significance. Depending on your interpretation, and I think depending on the city-state, if you won, you got to live. If you lost, you got sacrificed. Whereas in other city-states, maybe for an important event, maybe you'd want to lose and get sacrificed, or maybe you'd want to win to get sacrificed because that was a great honor to you and your family. Again, I want to say it's called pits, at least in Nahuatl, the Mayan language, one of their dialects. It's got different names really throughout Mesoamerica. It's practiced to some extent, I think, even in South America. But I put this up here to show you the extent of cultural borrowing. Again, this game probably originates with the Olmec. A lot of their deities and religious beliefs kind of bleed down throughout Mesoamerica, and they've changed a little bit over the years, syncretism. But, that's the foundation. A lot of other civilizations in the region kind of emulated them. The Aztec will kind of emulate the Maya. It's one of those things. They're not all exactly the same. Don't get me wrong. We're all unique in their own ways. But a lot of the foundation and a lot of the culture that we see in Mesoamerica, prior to the Spanish showing up, really starts with the Olmec, kind of bleeds out into the Maya, eventually kind of bleeds out into the Aztec that we're about to talk about next. So I gave you a bunch of this, but just to review, because I think it's that important. Explain a government practice that was used by the Maya that was similar to other groups we've studied. We just went over a bunch of things, but give me one thing. What's something they did as part of how they ruled that's pretty similar to other groups in Mesoamerica, really all over the world?
They captured war prisoners because they think are slaves.
Okay. Slave labor, prisoners of war used as such. I can get on board with that right here.
City-state.
The city-state organization. Rather than being a united group, they are united by their culture, but typically not united politically. We're going to see that, with the Greeks. That's how Mesopotamia was for a long time. The Aztec are kind of like that, but it's different. You do see that structure, though, throughout history. And a lot of people, like the Maya and the Greeks, we put together because they speak the same languages, they have the same religious beliefs, and the same culture, but politically, they're separate. And give me one more, maybe two more. Real basic stuff. Elijah, did you have your hand? Tributary system, boom. Make sure you got that down. A lot of people throughout history use that. And maybe one more. Think about the leader. What's he like? You can say this about almost every leader in the world at this point. What do they think they are? What do they say they are? Whatever to keep. Yeah, they're descended from the gods. They are gods. They speak for the gods. It's very much focused on what we talked about a while back, theocracy. They have some sort of, divine presence. The Maya did this, and so did our next group, the Aztec. Aztec are pretty darn interesting. We're going to watch a video here in a second that's pretty wild. Does anybody recognize this? That's from the flag of Mexico. Have you ever paid attention to what's really going on there?
Isn't it like when the Aztecs were fighting in the they believe like if they found a bird eating snake, it would be like their own gods. So they put it.
Yeah, I forget. I think it was either Huitzilopochtli or Quetzalcoatl, but one of the Aztec gods. The Aztecs start off as these hunter-gatherers in the northern part of Mexico, and they're wanderers. They're still nomadic. And in their culture, in their belief system, they believe that when they saw a certain vision, which, come on, how often have we seen this? An eagle perched on a cactus eating a rattlesnake, Probably looked for it for a long time, and they did. But they believe in their belief system, this God had dictated when they find that, that's when they need to settle, that's when they need to build their home. They're warriors, by nature, that's when they can kind of start building an empire. So they wander through the Valley of Mexico for years and years, and they, again, the story goes, find this image in the middle. It's a lake, but it is really more of a swamp than anything, Lake Texcoco. And in the middle of that lake, they built Tenochtitlan. Now, the Aztec, the name kind of describes, them and the loose confederation of the people that they eventually acquired. But the main tribe in the Aztec has a very specific name. The name may catch this in the reading. Helps to explain why you see this on a certain flag. The core name, I'll tell you guys this, but I write it down. They are the Mexica. The Mexica. Mexica. Guys, that's who Mexico's named after. Okay, after the Spanish conquest, after it was New Spain for years and years, when they get their independence, they wanted to look back to their indigenous roots, because the culture of Mexico, the ethnicity that you see, it's really a mixture of those two influences. Indigenous peoples, being the Aztec, the Maya, others, and the Spanish that came over and colonized. So to kind of rekindle some of the success of the past, to honor their past, well, they named themselves, they named the country after what, at the time of the Spanish conquest was the largest empire in North America that had some success. Their capital city was Tenochtitlan. Years later, when the Spanish come in and burn it to the ground, they actually drain this lake, because again, it was more or less a swamp. They renamed it. You guys know what it's called today? It's still the capital of Mexico. Mexico City and Tenochtitlan are the exact same place. Okay, obviously, it doesn't look the same anymore. And this lake was drained. It's one of the reasons when they have earthquakes there, because it's all, lake bed. It's very damaging. But again, you're looking at kind of the precursor to modern day Mexico. So we're going to watch a little video, our first video. I don't know if we'll get to the second, we'll see. This one's pretty cool. It's about 10 minutes, so it's a little bit longer than the ones I showed you yesterday, but I think that you will enjoy this one. This series that it's from. It's a show called Mankind, the Story of All of Us. It's on Amazon Prime, and I was going to pull it up on here, but I found it on YouTube. It's just a little easier to access. The resolution is not quite as good, but it's still not too bad. So this video, it's actually from a little bit past where we are, because this is from the episode that's all over the New World. They're going to introduce the Aztecs. They're going to introduce their culture. They're going to introduce that capital city of Tenochtitlan. They're going to also kind of introduce what we talked about earlier, human sacrifice. The Maya did it. A lot of Mesoamerican people did it. The Aztec were probably the most infamous for it. But again, you got to take it all with a grain of salt. Did they participate in it? Sure. We see artwork. We see, some of the evidence left behind that surely indicates that they did. But to what extent, it's kind of debatable. Again, a lot of our direct sources, our primary sources from that time period, they come from when the Spanish. And the Spanish, again, from their point of view, they had an agenda. So kind of keep that in mind, but I would say in general, the video kind of depicts the Aztec and Tenochtitlan prior to the Spanish showing up pretty accurate. So pay attention, you can take notes if you want. I may pause it here and there, but this video, like I said, I think that you'll enjoy it. Also, pay attention to the narrator. I'm pretty sure most of you guys have heard his voice before.
In the Americas, no iron tools or horses, no wheeled vehicles. Yet America's people engineered great monuments thousands of years before the Egyptians. They mapped the stars with as much accuracy as any astronomer in Europe.
And guys, the videos are on canvas that we're going to watch today.
They build one of the greatest cities on the planet. Capital of the Aztec Empire. Larger than London, Paris, or Rome. At its heart, a stone temple 100 feet high, where sky, earth, and underworld meet. The center of a civilization dedicated to human blood. Miles from the city. Aztec warriors are on a hunt. Their prey, not animals, but humans. They chase down the leader of an enemy tribe. Their aim is not to kill. They need to take him alive. Keep the universe in balance. The Aztecs believe they owe a debt of blood to their gods. Today, a special offer. Tlahuicole. Skilled warrior, bitter rival. The Aztecs' greatest prize. Fighting for his life. Aztec men are trained to fight from puberty. The fiercest become jaguar knights. Their weapons, not metal.
It's the weapon I was talking about earlier.
But obsidian, volcanic glass. So sharp, some surgeons today favor it over steel.
It is the most superior cutting material known to man, perfectly capable of cutting a man in two.
Tlahuicole's weapon, a club decorated with feathers.
Probably not as effective.
Not only is it terrifying if you were to imagine yourself in that position, it's also the opportunity to find out what you're made of.
A fight to the death will become Aztec legend.
It's not done. We're gonna watch the fight. We'll tell you a little bit later. It's like PG-13 level, but it's a little gory. I'll forewarn you what's gonna happen right before it happens. Anybody recognize that guy's voice? What's that? You're close. You guys have seen like the Avengers movies, right?
Brolin.
It's Thanos. Yeah, Josh Brolin, yeah. Very interesting stuff. All right, so they've given this guy something to kind of get him drunk, get him off of his senses, because this is a rugged character. And they have him chained on this platform, and they're going to use, their clubs with obsidian, and he gets a club with feathers. And again, whoever can kill him, even though he's in this sort of obviously compromised state, it's going to be a great honor because this guy's a renowned warrior. And again, we're focused on a very warlike cult. We'll see how it goes. Again, beliefs compel us to do some things, sometimes pretty wild.
Tenochtitlan, Mexico, capital of the Aztec Empire. A captive warrior fights for his life. jaguar knife, slice at his flesh to wear him down. The Aztecs have created one of the most sophisticated civilizations on the planet. A great city with laws against drunkenness, theft, and adultery. Compulsory education, 3.5 centuries before the United States. A city of philosophers, poets, mathematicians.
They valued art, literature. They were a very, very great civilized society.
But the Aztecs believed their gods need human blood. Eight men down, Tlahuacola is still standing. But his strength is fading. The warrior who cuts him down will get to wear his flayed skin for 20 days. His family will eat his flesh, giving them the status of gods.
Would you wear some dude's flayed skin as like a Shalapoli jacket for pretty gross? But again, it was a great honor because he was this noteworthy warrior. He was a guy that had been an enemy of the Aztec for years. Again, our beliefs, religion in general, regardless of what it is, throughout history, you're going to see it have a very strong power to motivate people to do things that sometimes are awesome, sometimes are just diabolical. It's just one of those things that's continuing throughout history. So let me forewarn you, you're going to see this priest stab old Shalapoli in the heart or in the chest. He's going to cut it open. Then he's going to tear his heart out, raise it up. And it is gross. It's not like the goriest thing you ever saw. It's a History Channel show. So don't worry, it's PG-13, if even that. But again, if you're kind of squeamish, feel free to shield your eyes. I'll let you know what's happening. But again, you got to understand this is part of the culture, and this is something that you see throughout Mesoamerica, although probably not to the extent that the Aztec allegedly engaged in it. And again, if you truly thought that the sun wouldn't gonna rise tomorrow unless you killed X amount of people, the crops weren't going to grow unless you sacrificed individuals. If you truly believe that and you're raised to acknowledge that, who knows what you
Aztec priests sacrificed thousands of men, women, and children a year, up to 20,000 in one of their most important ceremonies. One of the greatest acts of human sacrifice in history.
The Aztecs are very philosophical about death. Death is what gives meaning to life. And that by having the idea of death, it makes the here and now sweeter and more beautiful.
Tlahuacola is beating heart, offered to the god of the sun and war, Huitzilopochtli, guardian of the universe. In return, the Aztecs believed His blood will guarantee a bountiful harvest. A crop that will become key to mankind's future. Corn. 6,000 years ago, early farmers in the Americas turn a weed into a cereal that produces more calories per acre than any other, with almost twice as many genes as a human being.
It's one of those weird things, but corn, only in the Americas. And it was definitely a staple food stuff of, Mesoamerican culture. So let's talk just a little bit more. We'll finish up the Aztec at least. Might have to save the Inca for tomorrow, but even if we do, like the Inca, I don't have quite as much on. I got one video, but it's like 3 minutes. It's not that bad. Capital city, Tenochtitlan. You need to know that. You may want to put in parentheses. Now it's Mexico City. Again, the Spanish later on drained this lake because it's pretty much like a marsh. Don't think like a really awesome looking lake. It's marshland. But for the Aztec, this was a good location, even though land was sparse. They were well defended from their enemies. You've got all these different causeways leading to the island. The Aztec, they conquered a lot of people, so a lot of people didn't really like them. So to them, having this defensible position that to them was very sacred was really important. Tenochtitlan was a thriving city. I want to say when I looked through the reading, what they say in their population was like 200,000 at its height, which is insane, considering the time period that we're in. Much like other civilizations, they built pyramids, and they did have that sort of spiritual significance. It's weird that the pyramid shape is seen time and time again through these ancient civilizations. And I've seen some speculation that maybe, they're thinking about power, and they're looking to the shape of mountains. Again, nobody really knows for sure, but it is astonishing again that they were able to build these structures with without metal tools, without animals to help them, without wheels. The leader, the emperor of the Aztec Empire, they were called the Great Speaker because they spoke for the gods. And again, that it goes right in line with what we've been talking about. Theocracy, this connection to the supernatural. Much like Cahokia, much like Teotihuacan, Tenochtitlan was a trade center, had all sorts of products from all over Mesoamerica because the Aztec Empire got pretty big at one point, really funneling through there. A little harder to get to than some others. But again, the Aztec made it work. And that's the kind of dynamic there. They were a highly educated, highly sophisticated people. On one hand, they were very civilized. But on the other, you have these religious beliefs that require the shedding of human blood. One of the reasons so many products are coming into Tenochtitlan is the Aztecs operated a huge, tributary system. I would have that down, probably politics, tributary system. They were very aggressive. They were very warlike. They were noted for being these great warriors. Now, they would go in and physically conquer people. But after people had been conquered, they would say, you know what, your old leaders can still kind of run things here. They just got to pay us off every year. Tributary systems you see time and time again throughout history, because for the Aztecs, they can kind of, the Mexica, they can kind of kick it on Tenochtitlan, do their own thing. Technically, they've got all this territory, but in reality, those people out in far-off lands, the places they conquered, they're essentially governing themselves. They just got to pay off the Aztecs every year. Problem with that is it breeds a lot of animosity. The Aztecs are coming again, and they're stealing our wives and our children and our husbands, to sacrifice, and they're demanding, maybe a quarter of the crops we grow. And eventually, people are going to rebel. Guys, the Spanish, when they show up, and the guy that really leads them, after Columbus, the guy that's coming to actually conquer the Aztec, Hernán Cortés, he only had a few hundred soldiers. And we talked about the technological superiority, that's part of it. We will get into the diseases. Again, two different worlds. And the diseases have been in the old world People in the New World just had no natural immunity. But another reason that the Aztecs were defeated, man, the Spanish found allies along the way that were sick of Aztec rule. These new guys, they can't be any worse, right? Well, they were. But that's one of the reasons that the Aztecs. One key thing I want you to write down, and it's actually written here if you want to copy it. If you didn't get it already, Chinampas. Chinampas. The Aztec were really good at adapting to their environment, like all these native civilizations. We saw, the people in I can't even think of the name, Mesa Verde and Chaco, they're using building materials. They're finding ways to survive. And the Mississippians, they form a trade network using the rivers. And the Maya, they're using slash and burn agriculture to essentially farm jungle land. Well, one of the problems that people in Tenochtitlan had is they didn't have a whole lot of farming. So they made it. That's what Chinampas were. It literally translates into floating gardens. And that would be good, I don't know, maybe intellectual. I think that probably work best, maybe even economic. Chinampas. Like I said, Lake Texcoco was more of a swamp. It wasn't very deep in a lot of areas. So what they would do is they would kind of fence off, driving stakes into the lake bed. And then they would pile up dirt and moss and, debris until they had these raised platforms where they could plant their crops. And again, that's pretty innovative, considering it was such a large population, they needed, fresh food, locally available, didn't have a whole lot of land to farm, at least not right there, so they made it. We'll get into Waru and terracing more with the Inca, because that's what they were known for. But again, Chinampas. It's one of those innovative ways that these people adapted to the environment. I seem to be saying that a lot. So maybe it's one of those running themes that I've talked about. Aztec loved their chocolate. The way that chocolate gets learned about by the Europeans is when Hernan Cortez first met the emperor of the Aztec Empire at the time, Montezuma. He was drinking basically hot chocolate all the time, like 30 cups a day. Love this stuff. Chocolate obviously is derived from the cocoa bean. And it was really from that bean that you get your chocolate. Now this chocolate would have been really bitter because it didn't have sugar yet. And sugar is an old world crop. But eventually when cocoa is brought back to Europe and Africa and Asia and the sugar is added to it, that's when you end up with what you have today. Again, lots of things were kind of valuable. Cocoa was actually used as currency, along with beads and crops and things of that nature. They believed in a pantheon of gods, very similar to what you would have seen with the Maya and the Olmec and some others. But again, probably a little bit more warlike than some of those previous generations. You hear the word pantheon, that just means, a collection of gods. You hear the word deity, which means a god themselves. Again, their religion was integral to everything they did. And I think this is the last big key that I'm going to go over, but you got to think of the purpose. And again, some of it, I'm sure, has been exaggerated over the years, especially as the Spanish came in and they were doing some messed up things. They wanted to convert these people to Christianity. They wanted to control the land. They were going to make them look bad. But it's not out of nowhere. This is an Aztec source that did this stuff. You've got to think about why. And again, it has to do with religion, but it also has to do with exerting control. If you see your leader physically up there all the time, cutting people's hearts out and holding it in his hand, he's demonstrating power. He is demonstrating that he literally has the power of life and death. And that's one of the reasons I've been saying, you see leaders, participate in religious rituals and align themselves with religion, and sometimes claim to be more than just a person. It further cements their authority, it further cements their power. So this is twofold. Did they really believe this stuff? Yeah, probably. But, the leaders participated in it as well because, again, helped to assert their dominance. And we kind of talked about this. Why might fellow indigenous American tribes have assisted the Spanish in their conquest of the Aztec Empire? They were bullies. They ran a tributary system. They were robbing them blind. They were also sacrificing people. Tomorrow, we're going to open up with the Inca. The Inca will not take as long because I think I can get through them pretty quick. I always say that, but I really mean it. My game plan tomorrow, knock out the Inca in the first 20 minutes, and then the remainder of class, we're just talking about the SAT. That should be it. The SAT, it's over this time. All these things that I keep saying over and over and over and over again, you get sick of. Just think about that. It's probably for a reason. All this vocab I keep highlighting, it's for a reason. On the SATs, guys, a lot of times the easiest way to answer the questions, bring up some sort of specific piece of academic vocabulary that fits that question and use that as the foundation of your answer. And again, we'll go over the steps tomorrow, but make sure you're writing this stuff down. Other than that, we got a few minutes left. I'm going to come around and spray your desk here momentarily.